You mentioned that we forget that the notion of modernity that the West has come up with really emerges out of a particular time in our history when we made a transformation, and we forget that and then want to apply the concept that emerged from that to other peoples who come from different practices and different histories.
Exactly.
From this point of view, it becomes easier to understand Talal Asad's criticism towards Habermas's proposal that religious language should be translated into secular if it is to qualify for the political sphere, reminiscent of Spinoza's admonition to create an a-religious civic sphere, because it fails to escape the problem of incommensurability and bad faith. Quoting Balibar, what obliquely makes the encounter of different religions possible or allows them jointly to cultivate a free conversation in the public realm is the introduction or intervention there of a supplementary element that is, as such, a-religious. Feminist perspectives with regards to studies in comparative mythology and narratology may provide one way of bridging the gap between this theological and narrative aporia between the logos and the mythos. Considering how, out of the traditions of painting caves and storytelling while gathering around the fire can perhaps be said to be some of the oldest iterations of ritual practice, these questions ask to what degree can long-standing archetypes within a narrative structure be changed, as well as what is the extent of their universal applicability. For example, writers like Valerie Estelle Frankel and Maureen Murdoch and Clarissa Pinkola Estes create work that attempt to formulate alternatives to the conceivably masculine bias of the monomyth, as has been popularized by thinkers like Joseph Campbell. They attempt to create their own sentiments with regards to age-old and seemingly solidified mythological accounts. These imaginative visions are in the process of taking from a symbolic realm that is already given, reformulating it through an individual subjectivity, before being recast back into a collective conversation, except with retuned archetypes and protagonists that are not confined to any one tradition, but create their own tradition nonetheless. Reminiscent of the question of motivation when participating in civic life, narrativization, or mythos, that has the potential for transforming a history to a collective subjectivity, or her story, in the form of an our journey.
And now, for the boys.
This narrative of right is shared by a wide variety of traditions, including Confucius, where a mythic past is in service of a new ideal. Yet given Zizek's warnings of the totalitarian tendencies of collective narrativization from resuscitated traditions, combined with the problem of bad faith, incommensurability, and Derrida's skepticism with regards to narrativist claims regarding origins, perhaps a fully sensible and articulable narrative is asking too much. Here, again, we look away from art and narrative and towards the magic of ritual. The magic of ritual is that an outstretched hand invites the participation of the other into an almost immediately apprehended handshake interaction. Cheng Son Shen explains this in terms of the word li. Quote, "The word li originally meant holy ritual or sacrificial ceremony, and it is used by Confucius to mean more broadly behavior patterns established and accepted as appropriate through the history by a community, including what we call manners, etiquette, ceremonies, customs, rules of propriety, etc. The metaphor of holy ritual serves as a reminder that the most ordinary activities in our life can also be ritualistic or ceremonial, and it is the ceremonial that sets human activities apart from those of animals. The way we greet each other, a handshake for instance, is ritualistic, for it is not a mere physical touching of hands. We stand up to greet our guests and walk them to the door as they leave. These are rituals because, from the point of view of efficiency, they can be spared in the most cases. Like a popular Chinese expression, there is no why, 不为什么. At root, this gesture provides a sense of coherence not tied to any form of coercion, demands for explanation, or even any need for fully articulated narratives. The outstretched hand almost immediately opens a liminal space that is neither automatic nor fully creative. How the other participates, or whether the other participates at all, does not question the sensibility of the act. The ritual stands at the precipice between dichotomies such as the secular and the sacred, and the this-worldly and the otherworldly. For the act itself is an unavoidable and implicit acknowledgement of at least some form of communion. And I use the word communion specifically because I want to bring it back to the Christian understanding. Quoting Shen, the practice of ritual propriety, however, is ambiguous and leaves maximum space for uniqueness and creativity. A handshake in itself does not specify what is agreed upon, and yet a certain trust and mutual recognition can be established through it. Not only can the meaning carried by a handshake be richer than any agreement on principle, it will not lose mutuality for the sake of having an agreement, nor will it lack emotional content for the sake of retaining rationality. We can see how this magic of ritual is alluded to even if there is no actual participation by referring to Habermas's compelling illustration regarding the ancientness of recognizing the unexplainable void of existence in a section of his work entitled A Hypothesis Considering the Evolutionary Meaning of Rites. Here, Habermas describes how, though most primates have the ability to refer to objects in the world, the ability to maintain a shared symbolic reference to an unexplainable void with regard to the question of existence itself is perhaps a symbolic reference particular to humans. Similarly, Confucius also talked in terms of restoring an ancient harmony, but the practical import of his teaching was to lead men to look for new ways of interpreting and refashioning a local tradition in order to bring into being a new universal order to replace the contemporary disorder. Through a violent break to reveal clearly the nexus of the individual to society, an individual undergoes a ceremonial rite of passage to leave their intersubjective social world and gain their own particular entry into the universal, the universally shared symbolic reference to the crisis of meaning which the whole of society itself has been thrown into. Meaning, or at least the ability to allude to even the most minimal sensibilities, must come under crisis for a protagonist to arrive at a crossroads where a decision needs to be made. After having strived so hard to turn around, escape the cave, and discover the sun, a decision needs to be made about whether to return to the cave, to the society. Only when the protagonist of a ceremonial rite of passage recognizes a shared corporeal vulnerability, that the body will die with the rest of their tribe, are they then confronted with this question of how they should proceed, or what kind of life they should live. Confucius extends this individualistic theme of crisis, like the moment of doubt on the cross, by alluding to how social crisis is an essential ground of a civilized political, social unity as well. This critical juncture, coinciding with the Confucian emphasis on processes rather than turning points, is that both the individual and society are never actually in a position to choose. That is, both the individual and collective protagonists are always only ever operating from inside the cave.
While the others experience this in a very general way, your experience is far more specific, vis-a-vis love. No. Which brings us at last to the moment of truth, wherein the fundamental flaw is ultimately expressed and the anomaly revealed as both beginning and end. There are two doors. The door to your right leads to the source and the salvation of Zion. The door to your left leads back to the Matrix, to her, and to the end of your species. As you adequately put, the problem is choice. But we already know what you are going to do, don't we? Hope. It is the quintessential human delusion, simultaneously the source of your greatest strength and your greatest weakness.
If I were you, I would hope that we don't meet again.
Though such rites are perhaps particular to humans, they may simultaneously allow a collective identity to pull an empty seat for unmentionable ghosts.
Empty chairs at empty tables. Now my friends are dead.
Like the ghost of apocalyptic climate disaster, which may allow for what Latour is asking when he talks about the importance of having a seat for the geo or non-human contributions at the political table, or what the new materialists are asking for. In a similar way, these rituals are how we can create spaces for recognizing one another's burdens of trace, the haunting nightmares of history, another form of unmentionable ghost. Even if there are actual non-human contributions that can be evoked, any realizations, when translated back into an articulable realm of narrative, become once again steeped in a slew of pre-conscious biases and even calculative designs. Just as when we have a dream and we awake to tell someone or write it down, in the act of articulation itself, we are creating a narrative, a translation, that may not have actually taken place within the dream, that is likely much more chaotic and incomprehensible. Though it is still necessary to create some sort of linearity in order to be able to communicate ideas even to ourselves, perhaps the problem lies too much in such interferences with the sensibilities that arise out of the play within the realm of liminality between dichotomous ideas, as evoked by Donna Haraway's question, "Why should our bodies end at the skin?" lucidly echoed in the work of Marcel Proust. Proust vividly describes what waking up is like. "When I awoke at midnight, not knowing where I was, I could not be sure at first who I was. I had only the most rudimentary sense of existence, such as may lurk and flicker in the depths of an animal's consciousness. I was more destitute of human qualities than the cave dweller, but then the memory, not yet of the place in which I was, but of various other places where I had lived, and might now very possibly be, would come like a rope let down from heaven to draw me out of the abyss of not being, from which I could never have escaped by myself. In a flash, I would traverse and surmount centuries of civilization, and out of a half-visualized succession of oil lamps, followed by shirts with turned-down collars, would put together by degrees the component parts of my ego. Within the space of liminality, rituals have the potential to employ empty variables, for example, through an invocation of the ancestors, the ghosts, calls by other non-human entities to participate, or even as an interpretational gap itself.